after you download the week2sounds.zip file, go ahead and put that in the same folder as your last name sound project. So we're going to keep all of our sounds together in one folder along with our project because Audition is one of those software suites that points or looks around for files in other locations. So they're not actually embedded in this Audition file. It's just referencing them wherever they are. So to avoid having unlinked files, you keep them all together in one single folder. So if we go ahead and unload or double click that zip file, you'll see that I have some music and sound effects already downloaded for you. And it's organized by sound effects, music, and ambient type. And then here, there's the credits for those sounds. So you can look at them and then reference them in your own credits. And you can see I've made a note that I went ahead and searched only for CC0 sounds, for the ambient sounds and for the sound effects. And then from Free Music Archive, each of them has a different license. So you can pick and choose the ones you want. But you'll notice that none of them say ND or non-derivative because then you wouldn't be able to use them. One thing to also note is that when you go to a particular piece of music, on a Mac, if I hit Command I can get all the information about that and I can actually go back down here and find that original URL to that music. And then I can read all the information about it. And if I really like that artist, I can look around for some of their other musics. Now, just note that some artists will have all of their music with the same licensing, but most of them will have different licensings for different songs. So you do need to double check individual songs to make sure that you can use them. All right. So one other type of sound that I wanted to download that I haven't yet is, let me see if I can find my right browser window. Here we go. Is room tone. So if I type in room tone, room tone is literally the sound of an empty room. And the reason why you do that is if there's actually no sound there at all, a lot of times it'll kind of acoustically sound like there's a mistake or a glitch in the audio track. So you always have some very, very low level sound in a space, even if there's nothing happening. So one of the first things I'll normally do is I'll set down some room tone just in case I need it. I don't always need it. Sometimes I have a lot of pretty dense music. But you can see a lot of these are pretty long because you end up using them for quite a while. And here's one that's just Stairway. And if I play it, it just sounds like a little bit of an ambient hiss. So I'm going to go ahead and download that just because it'll take a little while. And I might not end up needing it, but it's a good idea to have some room tone just in case. All right, so now let's go ahead and start thinking about this project. So first I'm going to go and import in that sound that I recorded. Let me see, I gotta find my project. There's my Freeman sound project. And there's my Vox MP3. So that's my core narration. All right, so when you first open this up, you see the waveform, but I want to actually be able to mix this in a multi-track. I'm going to mix this with a bunch of other sounds. So I'm going to go from waveform to multi-track. And when I do that, then it knows that I want to make some kind of a session. So the first thing I'm going to do is call it Freeman Week 2 Sound Project. And I'm going to go to Browse, and I'm going to make sure that I'm saving it in that same folder. So I'll just go ahead and save it right in here. And I'm going to leave the sample rate, everything at the default, and then I'll say OK. And here it's made that multi-track, but I don't have that sound in there yet. That's because I have to actually drag it in. So I'll go ahead and drag this in. Now, what you typically want to do is label your tracks and organize them. So anytime you have narration or speakers, you usually put them on their own audio track. So I'm just going to have this guy right there. And when you play through it, you want to double check those audio levels. So remember before we were talking about -6 decibels. That's kind of this magic space. So your loudest sounds, the loudest you want it to go, is usually between -6 and -3. It depends a little bit on what you're mixing it for. Sometimes you can go a little bit higher. Sometimes you actually need to go a little lower. That just depends on the application, but having your sound peak right around -6 is a pretty safe
Hi,
bet.
you've reached Heather Freeman. I can't
So
get to the phone right now,
it's a
so
little
please leave a
low.
message. Thanks. Bye-bye.
It's a little low. So what I'm going to do is actually use an essential sound preset. So if you go to Window, you can pull up essential sounds if it's not already there. And if you go down to dialogue, I have a whole bunch of presets that I've already made for the podcast that I'm working on, but you can use just a generic speaker podcast voice, for example, or in a large room. So I'm just going to do podcast voice. It has a nice warmth to it. I've already cleaned up the noise in it, so there shouldn't be any noise, but it'll automatically analyze that sound and try to figure out, what, if anything, is needed to enhance that a little bit. I can also set the enhancing to be female because that's the nature of my voice. And within this, there's some sub presets. So I could just say subtle boost female, for example. Now if I play it,
Hi, you've reached Heather Freeman. I can't come to the phone.
you can see it has more of a radio kind of quality to it. There's that public radio sound because
Hi, you've reached Heather Freeman.
you can see that it has a little bit more warmth to it then. So you can play around, and the more you start to listen to how these different sounds work, that the more kind of feeling you get for what that's going to do. So I'm going to go to subtle boost female, and that loudest waveform, that very loudest peak, I don't know if you noticed, it went right up to -6. Let me play that again.
Hi, you've.
So that's as loud as I want it to get, but that's also my loudest waveform, so that's pretty perfect, so I'll just leave that as it is. All right, I'm going to go ahead and hit Command S to save. Now, what you probably want to do is listen to those different types of sound and ambient sounds and music. But typically what I do is I'll lay down the ambient sound or the music first and then mix in sound effects to it. So you typically don't necessarily use both ambient sound and music, but you can. So for instance, let's say I like this Italian village with no traffic. So I'm going to drag that in here just straight into the window. You can see how quiet it is compared to that waveform. And that might actually be okay. So let's listen to that.
Hi, you've reached Heather.
So I could probably boost this up a little bit if I bring the volume on this guy down, because sound compounds over time. But your ambient sounds, you usually want them to be around between -18 and -12. They tend to be a little bit louder. So I'm going to go ahead and click on the ambience button in this essential sound. So I did that kind of fast. And I'm going to do, let's see, from outside. And you can see the waveforms are getting boosted.
Hi, you've reached Heather Freeman.
So it has a little bit of an echo to it. I don't know if I want that exactly, so I can change that.
Hi, you've reached Heather.
That's pretty good. All right, now the subtle boost female is a little bit too much now, so I'm going to go back to the public radio sound.
Hi, you've reached Heather Freeman. I can't come to.
So that's pretty good. I could probably live with that. But the important thing is that I want to make sure this ambient sound is a little bit louder. So I'll go ahead in this case and just, sorry, that's my phone, boost up the volume. Normally you don't want to do that. It's like upsampling. So if you just do it a tiny bit, 1.3%, it's not a big deal. But that'll probably work okay. Next, I'm going to go ahead and add in, I'm going to actually duplicate this because it's a little bit short for what I want. So I want my speaking voice to come in right around there.
Bye-bye.
But I want it to also extend a little bit longer. So I'm going to hold down the Option key and just drag this out. And then what I can do is I can adjust that crossfade. So that's going to crossfade right while I'm talking, so we won't really notice it that much.
Please leave a message. Thanks.
But then I have a nice amount of audio at the end. So I'm sort of looping the sound a little bit, but because that crossfade is happening when I'm talking, then we don't notice it so much. All right, so in this case, I will add in some music. And I'm going to go to the music and we'll do, I'm not sure which of these guys we'll do. We'll do Night Owl, I guess. I feel like I've used that too much, but that's okay. And you can see that this is quite long. So what I want to do is, I know the song pretty well already, so I'm just going to jump over here and use this little chunk right there. And I'm going to delete this back end. And then I'm going to slide this down. So I'm doing this very quickly because it's better that you try to figure it out yourself. Okay, so that's pretty good, but now it's coming up much too abruptly. So I want to fade in this ambient sound, and I actually want this to be a little bit longer. So I'm going to let this fade in more gradually, and I'm going to have it fade out more gradually. I'll go ahead and trim that, and I'll have the music fade out. So I'm doing this really quickly, I know, just because I kind of already know how I want the sound to come across. But you always want to fade sounds in and out. Even this audio recording, I want to fade that in and out.
Hi, you've reached Heather Freeman. I can't come to the phone right now, so please leave a message. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Now, as I'm playing this, I'm watching this waveform right here. And you'll notice during those loudest
Hi,
parts,
you've reached Heather Freeman.
it's just flickering up just above the 6. So it's red, but it's not clipping into the red. Let me show you what clipping looks like. I'm going to turn down the volume on my computer so it doesn't blast you. Okay, so you're not going to hear it, but watch the waveform. Oh, it's still not, it's not being too horrible. Okay, let me try this. I'm going to try to just really make it horrible. There, okay. See how it's, if I had my volume up, this would like destroy our ears and it would be horrible. But see how those red lights are staying there? That you never, ever, ever want. So you can click on it to set them, reset them. But if you are playing through your audio, you want to watch your audio meter as you're listening. And you're going to see where it's flickering. If it flickers up, if your loudest sounds flicker up just around between -6 and -3, that's perfect. If it goes higher than -3, and especially if it goes into those red bars, you need to adjust those audio levels. So, with this guy, for instance, if this were really too loud, it's not, but if it were, I might have to come in and actually pull down the audio a little bit during that peak so that it's not quite so abrupt. It's fine here, but that is something to be aware of. Now, I sort of got ahead of myself. We need to label these tracks. So this is my ambient sound. You always want to label them. This is my music. Typically, your music is quieter around -24 to -18, with your ambient sounds louder, -18 and -12. Sometimes they're reversed, actually. It kind of depends on what you're doing. And sometimes you'll have to fade out the music a little bit as the ambient sound fades in. But in this case, I actually am not needing to do that too much. So finally, I'll add in some sound effects just to make it a little bit richer. So let's do the gong. I don't know, that's probably going to be too weird, but we'll try it. And I'll just see what this sounds like. Whoops. Would be good if I actually had my volume up. Okay, there we go. All right, that's sort of goofy, but I could probably do that. I'm going to fade that in a little bit and fade it out. And then just for kicks, I'm going to put in another sound effect. How about, let's do that red-shouldered hawk, just because I like red-shouldered hawks. You'll notice, by the way, when I bring these in, it's generating a PKF file. That's because it's converting the waveform to match the settings for this multi-track, and that's fine, but it's just something to be aware of. And I think what I'll do is I'll have this hawk kind of fade out right along with that music. And I just want to listen to it again and make sure that it's not too loud. And one thing that I could do with this that would be kind of fun is to make the sound travel from the left channel to the right channel. So if I move this, or if I move this all the way to, like, say 83% left to then maybe 90% right, we'll just do a little bit less than that, then it'll sound like that hawk is traveling from one side. It'll go from one ear to the other ear if you're listening to headphones. It'll sound like it's traveling across you. So that would be kind of cool. All right, so now I have this session all mixed. What you'd want to do is listen to it all the way through with headphones to hear how it sounds. And then you want to watch those audio levels. Again, you don't want any clipping. That's the cardinal sin. That's definitely going to take off some points from this assignment. So as long as it's not clipping, and as long as the loudest sounds are between -6 and -3, then you're fine. By the way, you don't have to use the sounds in the folder Finding sounds is actually one of the things that takes the most time. So if you're rushed for time and you just need to get this assignment done to get on to the next thing, by all means, just use the sounds I've given you. If you have time and you want to play around with this and you're enjoying it, go ahead and download your own sound effects, ambient sound, and music. But, oops, I need to label this. What I do want to see is that you have a narration track, an ambient track, a music track, and a sound effects track. And you want to make sure that they're labeled. They don't have to be in that order, but the narration is always at the top. That's just one of those things. Actually, usually music is at the bottom and sound effects is above those, but that's fine. That's okay. All right. Now, before we finalize this, we're going to do two things. One is we're going to export, do a multi-track mixdown of the entire session. And what it's going to do is it's going to end wherever that sound is. So if you look up at this top bar, you can see that I don't have any little sound clips down at the end or anything like that. So you want to make sure that they start at the beginning and there's nothing sort of after that. So that way, whenever the sound ends, that's when that session's going to end. So I'll go to Export, Multi-Track Mixdown, Entire Session. Now I'm going to make sure that this is saving where I want it to. Let's see. I think I actually did have the right spot. So it's going to save inside this folder. Freeman Week 2 Sound Project, Mixdown. You can just leave that name alone as long as it's saving in that folder. Say save. And it's setting to an MP3, which is perfect. And then we'll say OK. And it mixes it down. It'll go pretty quickly because there's not a lot happening here. Now the next thing you need to do, this is the really important part, is we're going to actually export this entire session. So right now, all of our files are very well organized, but we don't have a whole lot of files in here. So if you zipped that whole folder and uploaded it to Canvas, it would be a really giant folder, and we just don't need that much. So what we want to do is we want to make a copy of this whole project, but also nothing else. So I'm going to go to File, I'll go to Export, Session, and we're basically making a copy of this. So I'm going to browse, I'm going to find a new location, I'm going to make a new folder, and I'm going to call it Freeman Week 2 Sound Project Copy, and I'm going to say save. And I'm going to make sure that it says save copies of associated files. We don't need to convert them or do anything like that. So we just want to make sure that it's copying those files. And we could actually even open it after the session if we wanted. Then we'll say OK. We'll close out of this. I'm going to go ahead and find that folder. Let me see where to go. There it is. And so what it's done is it's made copies of just the files we've used and that session folder. So I can open this up just to make sure that it's all working properly. Perfect. Okay, there it is. So you can either export this again, or I'm just going to go and make a copy of that mixdown. So I'll do Command C to copy it, and I'll paste it in here. Because the file that you want to upload, you want it to be the cleaned up copy. So it's just made copies of the files that you used in this project. You want to open that up to make sure that everything's linking properly. And you can either export the multi-track session directly in here to generate that MP3, or you can copy and paste it. Either one is fine. Before you upload it, you want to listen to it one more time to make sure that it's correct. So for instance, if sometimes what happens if you have a clip at the end, it'll be like 5 minutes long and you're like, why is it 5 minutes long? And that's because it has 5 minutes of silence at the end pretty much. So you want to make sure that that's correct. Once that's done, then on a Mac you would control click on it and do compress, which will generate a zip folder. And now this is the zip folder that I would upload to Canvas. So that's your creative exercise for this week.